Okay. Well, if you refer to Iran, as I mentioned before, we have gone through the diplomatic option, we have gone through the economic sanction option, and the results are known to us. Namely, Iran is now at the last lap of the nuclear marathon. There are those who claim that economic sanctions have been effective and that therefore there are negotiations with Iran. I beg to differ because the fact is that economic sanctions have devastated the Iranian economy but have left no dent on Iran's pursuit of nuclear capabilities. And therefore, to persist with economic sanctions would be worthless and working only in favor of Iran's number one goal to become nuclear. The assumption that a rogue regime like Iran cannot subordinate the welfare of its citizens to the pursuit of nuclear goal is reflection of gullibility. North Korea has done that, Pakistan has done that, and Iran is doing that because rogue regimes do not care about the welfare of their citizens. That's the reason they are rogue regimes. We cannot approach them as if they think like us. And therefore, there's only one a constructive option to avoid a large-scale war, only one option to avoid a nuclear war, only one option to avoid facing an Iran which again is could become a non-controllable strategic apocalyptic threat, and that option is surgical, devastating, disproportional preemption, military preemption against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The question is, would the U.S. do that, or Israel do that, or maybe together? And I know that at this stage, the prospects of U.S. doing that
muted
very, very slim, if at all, and
unmuted
is left as the probably the only option available. And I have no doubt that we do have the capabilities. The question is, again, that of backbone leadership. And that will be proven, I think, in the next few months or during the next year, unless the free world and Israel want to face a nuclear Iran, which would cause at first a meltdown of the pro-American oil-producing regimes in the Gulf, which would cause havoc to the supply of oil and the price of oil, and therefore once again is going to devastate the American economy, would provide major tailwind to anti-American Islamic terrorism, and this time once again on the American-owned mainland, would upgrade the capabilities of Venezuela and possibly Bolivia, Ecuador, who knows, some parts of Mexico, to undermine homeland security in America. All of that, I believe, is in the cards should there be a nuclear Iran. If the reference of the question, what should Israel do when it comes to a smaller issue, and that is the Palestinian issue or the Arab-Israeli conflict, I don't belong to those who subordinate...
No. The question was for Iran, and I thank you very much for your analysis. As a matter of fact, I agree entirely with you. Thank you.
I would like to make one addition, and that is everything I said, and I would like to underline it, and not only for tactical reason, but everything which I said is under the assumption that we are talking about a military preemption with no boots on the ground. There is no need for boots on the ground, and anybody who tries to scare people away from that option by telling them that the military preemption would drag the U.S. into a war, in fact is dragging the U.S. into a war, but into a nuclear war.
I wanted to ask you, there are about 50 people or so on this call. I think a large percentage are Americans. And you've certainly been very informative. A lot of us knew a lot of this already, of course. My question is, what suggestions do you, Michael, and you, Yoram, have for individual Americans who consider themselves activists in this area to do here in the United States? What to do, who to talk to, what kind of influence can we have?
Well, that's a great question. I disagree with Yoram in that I believe there is a third option for dealing with Iran, and that is to support Iranian people and to support the Iranian opposition against the regime. And then, in fact, I agree with the Washington Post that if you want to end the Iranian nuclear project, the only reliable way to do that is to change the regime in Tehran. And there's every reason to believe that the Iranian opposition is pro-Western, anti-terrorist, wants to be part of the Western world, don't think of themselves as part of a Muslim uprising against the infidel West and all of those things. Therefore, my answer to your question is talk to your elected representatives and talk to your active organizations and tell them that we supporting the Iranian opposition as we supported the Soviet opposition in the war. This whole debate over what about Iran is just weirdly reminiscent of the same debate that we had about the Soviet Union. When we in the Reagan administration started Soviet dissidents, and ask Sharansky about when we started supporting Soviet dissidents, refused Nixon, so against the Kremlin, under President Reagan, heads of organizations, leading came to us and said, what are you, crazy? You're going to make things worse, not better. You're going to increase the repression of those people inside the Soviet Union, push the Soviets' backs against the wall. Still with Gorbachev. He's a reasonable person, the kind of guy that we can work with. But above all, don't help the dissidents. Don't support opposition. And we now know from all the dissidents who came out after the fall of that supporting the dissidents was one of the really great things that we did, and it was one of the things that all the Soviet Empire. Now, I put it to you, if we could bring down the Soviet Union by supporting Soviet opposition, and the Soviet Union was a big deal and a superpower, how can we fail to bring down Iran if we support the Iranian opposition? And the Iranian opposition is stronger and a much higher percentage of the Iranian population. Soviet dissidents were of the Soviet population. Answer, bring it down. Support the Iranian people. It's an unpopular regime, a hollow regime. They're scared to death of the Iranian people are our greatest against this regime. Use it.
If I can add here, while I agree with Michael that the best way to do it would be through domestic regime change, it seems to me that especially after the 2009 debacle, the domestic opposition is greatly deterred by the central regime and will be deterred as long as they witness the U.S. and Israel reluctant to defy that regime. Namely, the only way to produce a regime change, in my mind, would be a military preemption limited surgically to the nuclear infrastructure with no boots on the ground, which would send the message to the domestic opposition. Unlike 2009, the free world has decided to do away with the central regime, and now it's up to you, domestic folks, to complete the task. As far as being deterred from a nuclear preemption, that would sustain the posture of deterrence by the mullahs against any possible domestic regime change initiative, talking about what could individual Americans do. As an Israeli, I would say that you are part of an enviable, in my mind, enviable political system. As much as you criticize the political system in America, it's by far the best in the world today. Nothing like the Europeans and nothing like the Israeli self-destruct political systems. Under your system, you are the center of the system. I spend much time on Capitol Hill, and I hear the reverberation of "We shall remember in November." Every single senator and House member is concerned about November, and certainly that does accord the constituent very significant power to make a change, to impact the changes. And I think that when it comes to Iran, the top priority is to send a message to legislators: you don't do that for Israel. You do it for America. Namely, Israel's best friends on Capitol Hill are being told today by Israeli leaders and by friends of Israel, please have the back of our ally in the Middle East. It's the wrong approach. Israel should not be part of any Iranian-related activity on the Hill. It is America which is the number one target for Iran and not Israel. And once American legislators realize that, we're going to see a sea change of attitudes on the Hill, which could be the element stopping Iran from becoming a nuclear power.
Any further questions to Yoram and
Sarah,
Michael?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You've been fading in and out on me. But anyway, this is Doris Leeds from EMET, and I have a question about a preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. I have read that such a preemptive strike would only set their program back 2 to 3 years. And I'm wondering if you agree with that, and if you feel that such a strike would be worth it under those circumstances.
Well, even if you assume that, and I think this is what I would call the minimalist case or the worst case scenario, even that is better than simply reconciling ourselves and going back to Michael's appropriate reference to regime change. Those 2 years would provide a very effective podium for the domestic opposition to flex its muscles and hopefully, with the help of the free world, produce a regime change. But I think most importantly is that we should not be trapped by those who threaten or those who scare the people who promote military preemption by telling them the U.S. is not willing to be dragged into another war. And I repeat, anybody who chooses to refrain from surgical, no boots on the ground military preemption, anybody who does that would drag the U.S. into a horrible war, into a potentially nuclear war, and certainly into a much more devastating state of homeland security on the American mainland.
Dr. Ledeen, Ambassador Ettinger, this is Pete Karkoff again, and I have a quick question and comment for Dr. Ledeen. In order to lobby Congress from an Iranian perspective as opposed to an Israeli perspective, and Sarah, you're doing a great job with EMET, how do we counter NIAC other than supporting the NCRI, the National Council for Resistance of Iran? Is there another organization that is aligned with the Iranian people's interest other than the NCRI that is organized and ready to be that we can assist with in terms of lobbying our Congress in relation to supporting the people of Iran? Because I agree with you, Dr. Ledeen, but I also agree in Dr. Ettinger's at this point in time, I don't think we can have effective regime change without the military option in addition to supporting the people.
Well, the people we have to work with are the people inside Iran, not people running around holding conferences in Washington or Paris or London or wherever it may be. Keep thinking back to the support we gave to opposition to the Soviet regime. We dealt with domestic trade unions. We organized international trade union organizations from the AFL-CIO to European organizations to support their brothers and sisters inside the Soviet Union. We should be doing the same thing today with Iranian workers. Listen, I am in constant touch and have been for 25 or 30 years with what is now called the Green Movement, which is the big organization opposed to the regime inside Iran. If I can contact them, believe me, the American government can contact them. And yet they are sitting there, their leaders in jail for over 1,000 days. Hardly anybody says anything about them, Mousavi, Ruby, and so forth. And yet these people generated the biggest mass demonstrations in Iran at the time of the Shah. So we know there's tens of millions of them. The MEK that you asked about is a few thousand people. It's minuscule. It does not speak for large numbers of Iranians. One of the problems with the MEK, aside from its being an anti-democratic cult of personality, is that they do not have mass following inside Iran, and they don't have mass following because for 20 years they were working for Saddam Hussein, and they were going in and out of Iran killing Iranians, and Iranians don't like them, by and large. It is not a popular movement. Whereas the workers' organizations, the student movement, the teachers' organizations, the Green Movement, these are huge mass organizations of which the regime is quite clearly terrified. And you can see it from the behavior. Work with them. Talk to them. I mean, when I talk to people in the Green Movement, they're stunned by the fact that no Western government has spoken to them since the mass demonstrations of 2009, 2010. Not us, not the Europeans, not the Saudis, not the Israelis, not anybody. No one is talking to them. That strikes me as folly. At a minimum, start talking to them. Deal with them. See what we can do. They are our greatest weapon. And the Iranian regime knows that. Now, as concerns the question, if we bomb them, it only sets them back a couple of years. Well, setting them back a couple of years is a good thing. I mean, it's a lot better than having them speed toward nuclear weapons today. That's number one. Number two, no one knows what the consequences of such an action would be. Everybody thinks he's an expert and can tell you what the Iranian people will do, what the regime will do. They will unleash terrorism. They will attack American military bases in the Middle East. They'll do it. We don't know. They're scared to death of us. They do not want confrontation, direct confrontation with the United States on the ground or in the air or on the seas, any of those things. They do it secretly. They try to do it through proxies. So they're frightened of us. One of the things I like about sanctions is not that, Yoram's entirely right, sanctions is not going to deter the Iranian regime from pursuing nuclear weapons. But sanctions do send a message to the Iranian people that we don't like what the Iranian regime is doing. And that's enormously important, especially after our betrayal of the Iranian people in 2009 and our refusal to speak out for them ever since. So I like sanctions as a political weapon. I'm always thinking about political weapons. No one thought that the Soviet Union would fall from within and would implode. People act today as if the Iranian regime is some kind of very powerful, stable and effectively repressive regime. Well, the KGB was very repressive and very effective. I don't believe the Iranians are as effective as the KGB was, and I do know that the opposition to the regime inside Iran is much bigger than the opposition was to the Soviet Union.
To say, just on closing, we are extraordinarily honored to have this treasure trove of intellectual wealth that are all friends of EMET. And we do feel very, very strongly that both in terms of the tragedy that happened in 2009 when there were people out in the street, massive people, and their heads were crushed in, and they ended up in the notorious Iran prison, and the fact that our the leader of the free world did not say anything really set us back. It didn't say anything for 2 weeks. That really set us back in terms of empowering them. I think that the combination that has been presented between both of our wonderful speakers is very, very important. We need to stop empowering Iran. This very, very hollow agreement has been empowering Iran, and we have to stop cowering to them. And unfortunately, it's about time America looks deep down inside of themselves and summons up the courage to know that we're a strong nation once again.